Hey everybody, TacticAngel back on the PlayStation 5 to take a look at another premium ship in World of Warships Legends. This time we'll be looking at the Dalian, a Tier 8 premium Pan-Asian light cruiser. For this review, we'll start with some history, move into analysis, run down the stats with you, and then finish off with some gameplay. If you want to skip around at all, you should see some time codes in the description to help you out. So for history, we'll just talk about what this is supposed to be. But this is probably a bit closer to a creative writing assignment than a history section, so Dalian is based off one of the designs created during the Project MK Cruiser program, which was a project of the Soviet Union to create a small scout cruiser similar, in theory, to the US Atlanta or British Dido class, which were ships initially designed to lead destroyer squadrons. As such, they should be capable, basically, of engaging destroyers and, on the upper end, light cruisers. Project MK features multiple designs, beginning in 1940, which means we're probably coming back to this as a basis of some other premium ships in the future. But this design is at least theoretically based off of the MK6 design, a cruiser of approximately 7,800 tons with a power plant that consists of three 35,000 horsepower engines that would drive it to a theoretical speed of 38 knots. She'd be armed with a main battery of 10 5.1-inch guns, 8 more 37mm AA guns, and 6 torpedo tubes in 2 triple launchers, plus a float plane. Now I have no idea what happened to the float plane in World of Warships, because the MK6 is already in the game, in some fashion, as the Harbin. Maybe those were sacrificed in order to make weight for a couple of extra racks of torpedoes. In this case, the Dalian is either contemplating what this ship would be, with the 130mm guns that the MK6 was initially designed with, or what it might have been if it had been refit with more modern guns and the more advanced turret than the universal mount for the 1936 version of this gun. The latter is probably a bit more likely since that was actually a gun in service with the People's Liberation Army Navy on Luda-class destroyers starting in 1958, though these communist Chinese turrets may look similar to those found on Nostroshimi or as secondary guns on several other larger Soviet ships. This is actually an inferior mount that lacks both radar and stabilization if we are to assume that these mountings are similar to the Luda class. So the choice of these weapons has some basis, particularly depending on if you envision this as having been transferred to the Chinese communists. Most likely, you'd have to envision this in the late 50s or early 60s. Of course, the Luda class that I mentioned aren't just armed with these guns, but actually HY-1 Silkworm anti-ship missiles, with the latter, Luda 2, 3, and 4, having progressive upgrades to that system. So it's not real clear why they'd want a nearly 20-year-old cruiser design at that point that doesn't have that sort of stuff, so you're going to have to generate your own headcanon on how this ship fits into the game. As far as I'm concerned, though, it's only the midway chapter and how the Soviets could have built at least one Project MK cruiser, then they could have transferred one or several of them to the Maoists, then the People's Liberation Army Navy could have upgraded them with these guns and named it the Dalian after a city on the Liaodong Peninsula. Later, the captain of the Dalian could have defected to the Republic of China, eventually immigrated to the United States where he married a woman. Together they would have a daughter who would put herself through college by waiting tables, where she met Kevin Bacon one afternoon while he was reading over the script for the relatively unremarkable 1984 film, Enormous Changes at the Last Minute. In short, that's how the could-have-been history of Dalian would have been only 4 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon. As far as Dalian in-game, she's the first premium Pan-Asian cruiser at Tier 8, and in fact the first premium super light cruiser at that tier. That said, there is a whole Pan-Asian light cruiser line, and on top of that you've got other ships like Atlanta, Flint, and even San Diego, and to a certain extent the Dalian is exactly what you'd expect if you'd have played those things. Which means that the Dalian is good at putting a lot of hate in the form of massed, fast-firing HE shells that have both better penetration than you'd expect and a good fire chance by volume. She's also not just stealthy, but likely to be the least visible thing out there that isn't a destroyer, and you can't overstate how much that is worth in a ship like this. Because on the downside, just like the rest of the Pan-Asian superlights, Dalian is somewhat of a feeble panda that is just waiting to be given an express ticket to visit Harambe by just about anything willing to shoot at it. You've got virtually no armor, it's got a pretty big citadel, and relatively few hit points. And to that point, you're also not that great at dealing with destroyers. Dalian doesn't have sonar, like most cruisers, and doesn't have radar like Atlanta. So even among those ships that can't one-tap you with guns, you can find yourself easily on the wrong side of the equation, even with destroyers. But to that point, we have a little bit of a disclaimer. If you really like deep water torpedoes, you may find this ship a little less enjoyable. She certainly takes a hit in terms of range and torpedo detectability, but if you prefer the American superlights with torpedoes that can hit everything, just as long as they're close enough, then that's a plus. So you end up with a ship that is more or less what you'd expect it would be. This is going to be a good thing if you like this sort of cruiser because you get what you pay for, and at this case it's just a tier 8. On the downside, if you're pinched for doubloons, you're not buying an experience here that you can't have in half a dozen other ships that aren't at tier 8. And I'm not trying to be willfully obtuse about how I describe this thing, but you probably already know if you like this kind of ship, or if you like being the plaything for legendary tier ships. Next, we'll jump into stats, and like usual, everything you see on screen should be base statistics, though they do represent stats with the camo that comes with the ship. Survivability isn't going to be a great thing for Dalian. With just 35,000 hit points, you have more HP than Sejong, and that's it. Some of that advantage over Sejong, the tech tree equivalent, is likely to be sacrificed to Dalian's armor scheme. On paper here, 12 to 100 is actually better than Sejong, but when we look at how the armor is actually laid out, you've got 16 millimeters everywhere, and though your belt armor is 5 millimeters thicker, you're missing the 32 millimeter plating along the upper belt and half of the bow that can make taking hits in Sejong a slightly more enjoyable experience, or less damaging. So survivability in Dalian may work out a little bit different, but the overall message is still the same. If you don't behave correctly in this ship, you will die quickly. And that's exchanged for a lot of spreadsheet damage per minute that doesn't totally translate to a lot of damage in battle. The 5 fast-firing 130mm guns can put a lot of shells in the air. 14.9 range is near the bottom for the tier, but say what you will about tier 8, it's a lesser disadvantage than you'd find on other tiers. 4.9 seconds on the reload is good, and the turret rotation is not exactly DD fast, but it's lightning for a cruiser. The 130mm guns are 5-inch guns, doubly so if you're bad at math. That said, 2,000 damage on the HE is not catastrophic. 2,600 is pretty predictable for 5-inch guns, but the real winners for these guns are having a non-catastrophic shell velocity, meaning they'll actually get to their target in a predictable amount of time, and a potent 10% fire chance. Then there's a hidden stat, 1/5 penetration. That's going to help you get through 27 millimeters of armor, but not 30 or 32. That's going to help you out with a lot of cruisers, a bit on battle cruisers from the side, and generally not battleships quite so much. So where Sejong wins out on DPS, in practice, more of Dalian's DPS is going to stick. Similar to Sejong, you have 2 sets of torpedoes, this time with 3 torpedoes per rack on each side. These range out to just 10 kilometers, which is nothing to shake a stick at on a cruiser, but not amazing, and certainly shorter than some Pan-Asian cruisers. 15,100 damage per torpedo, and a 90-second reload gives her one of the better torpedo damage potentials for a cruiser, and the 60-knot torpedo speed is just a little below average. But the real thing worth mentioning here is that these are standard torpedoes. They will hit everything. Well, everything that you aim at correctly. Anyway, so battleship, cruiser, or destroyer, it's all the same. You're gonna do damage. AA on Dalian is just a bit above average. You've got just a bit of medium range AA, and the vast majority of your output is with your main battery. That's good news because you may lose the 4-kilometer guns, but it's going to be relatively hard to knock out your main battery, so you'll be putting flak out there at 5.2 until you die, and maybe longer ranges too if you're into that. In terms of maneuverability, Dalian is just about average in terms of the speed department, but as you might expect, the 660 meter turning circle here is not only good, but best at the tier by 10 meters. The 6.9 second rudder is also very quick. That more or less makes this behave like any other ship of that line, just a bit better in every way. And concealment is an even better story than that. Right now, Dalian is the stealthiest of the cruisers at Tier 8, enjoying more than a kilometer advantage versus the Sejong. Similarly, 6.4 is 130 meters, better than average from the air, again the best, and 4.4 firing in smoke, same idea. There's really just no complaining about this thing being too visible in the game, it's just silly how stealthy it is. And if all that stealth doesn't work out for you, the Dalian has some other tools which might help. I'm gonna sail right past the damage control party because this thing is nothing special and point out that you have smoke screens. This is a little wild considering the very good firing sea detectability and failing that smoke penalty that comes with this ship. You get 4 of them with a 70-second duration, 110 seconds on the reload. This is, like other Pan-Asians, short duration but shorter reload, very workable. You also have 3 heals. They're normal on how much they work, but having 3 is one better than usual. I suspect if you survive to get to use all 3, then you've probably earned it. You also don't get a choice, but you do get DFAA, 2 of them by default, and at least for 2 opportunities you have pretty fearsome amounts of AA for 40 seconds. For anyone keeping track at home, these are all pretty similar to what you'd find on higher tier Pan-Asian light cruisers, but rather than having a choice between a heal and DFAA, you get both, but at the expense of that torpedo reload booster. That should bring us pretty neatly along to gameplay. We're going to be on Land of Fire. There's our Dalian. I have actually already checked out what's in the match with me. And as we're starting out, we'll go ahead and put our commander up on the screen real quick. And I'll say there are, I think, 2 ways of running this. One of which is you kind of lean into the smoke, and the other is that you kind of lean into the stealth. I prefer to lean into the stealth because most of these maps have islands, except for the one that isn't really in the game that nobody really enjoys playing on. So hopefully it stays out. That's Ocean, by the way. And as far as I can tell, this is a very stealthy boat. You can see I've checked my sea detectability just there. And at 8.1, good luck finding me unless you are a destroyer. And I figure this ship does the rest of this pretty well on its own. You could maybe build an off-class build of some sort to try to get more out of the torpedoes. I don't really see any reason in doing that. I like guns. I'm an American. I don't know what to tell you. We're looking to sneak around for a while and then shoot somebody a whole bunch of times in Dalian today. In any case, we are lagging back a little bit here, getting in a good position to provide some fire support. As we're looking up at the mini-map, you can see that our gun range is effectively twice what our sea detectability is, so we're going to be able to provide a lot of fire support, and if we're in a good place, we can do so without using a smoke, and if we're not in a great place, then we can always hit the smoke screen. Now I fire and I see that I'm detected, not going particularly fast, so we go ahead and pop one of those smoke screens. Now we're not going to be quite as easily targetable, and we're going to start putting a lot of shells out there on the Johann de Witt. Our hope here obviously is it's just to do damage, break modules, all the normal sorts of stuff. He's burnt his damage control, so at this point, if we can start landing more fires on him, they're going to stick forever. And you can see kind of everything that's hitting his ship is causing some damage. Part of that is because of his superstructure, and part of that is because the 1/5 penetration is going to help us get through his deck. Another nice thing about Dalian is that the shell arcs here are pretty manageable. Like, they're not the best shell arcs in terms of maybe being able to land shots. And they're not the worst shell arcs, like trying to shoot something with an 18-second hang time on Flint. So it's a very comfortable ship to be able to try to land these sorts of shots. Obviously, what you can see I'm doing right here is demonstrating that I'm not real great at blind firing people. Usually what I do, which is level 1 blind firing, is shoot at the black puffs. If you hit somebody, he's still probably there. Failing that, you can always run away. And as we run away, I will point out that we had less than 20 seconds left on our smoke recharge. So, realistically speaking, the amount of time that you have to spend in the open is pretty low in this ship. That makes Dalian a really powerful HE spammer. The 10% fire chance is nice right out of the box. We've got it up to 12%. That's great. We got a little extra stealth with this particular build. We've got a lot of tools, and the one thing that we don't have is some of those traditional cruiser nice to haves, particularly at high tier. Things like sonar and radar. Now I'm going to start shooting some AP at this Karl XIV Johann just to see if I can't do decent damage. The answer to that seems to be pretty quickly no. Karl XIV, though he is a battle cruiser, probably not the best thing to shoot at with Dalian, just because it has actually more of a battleship armor scheme. Not a lot of 27 or less armor on that thing, so we really do just shoot at it for the sake of starting fires. Now, as we're speeding towards the middle cap, you can see that we are down a ship. Not fantastic, and you can see also that I'm looking over at Schlieffen. I was correct when I left that side that they were going to be able to take it. Holding on to it might be a little bit more difficult. The Schlieffen continues to appear and disappear, appear and disappear. And we're just trying to figure when is he going to try to push forward, because 10 kilometers on our torpedoes isn't a great range for something like the Sejong, but it's actually more than enough to do a lot of the things Dalian needs to do. I have about 2 kilometers difference between my sea detectability and my torpedo range, which is, you know, pretty good. Unfortunately, what we're driving into is a situation where we have a couple of destroyers that are still on the enemy team, and I don't have the best tools to be able to deal with them. I am very capable of dealing with them if I can shoot at them. In this case, we've got some shots out on the Z-52. But if they don't give me an opportunity to shoot at them, I'm a little bit at a disadvantage. So if you're in a destroyer and you're playing against Dalian, you know, just keep your distance. Don't get spotted, and there's nothing it can do to really, like, force the issue. I'm pretty fast because I am choosing a different route with Dengushan, but most destroyers are still going to be faster than that. And if you're not using this captain, then you can count on Dalian being even slower. Now we see a smoke screen, and that's fun because that means that he can't see us and we can't see him. And that is a little bit of a fun opportunity for us because since we don't have a lot of vision mechanics, we can try to just zone in on him with a Mark 1 eyeball and try to get over there. He briefly pops up here. We get some shells out on him. We are definitely very zoned in on what we're trying to do, which is dodge the person in front of us. Our predictive torps actually end up working out just because I think we kind of encouraged him to drive back into the torpedoes. And you can see when Dalian gets an opportunity to deal with destroyers, very effective. We've also seen when Dalian shoots at a battleship, not always quite as effective. Cruiser, I assume that I could do some pretty decent damage to Alaska just based on the amount of superstructure that it has. But it actually does have a lot of 30mm armor as well, if I recall correctly. And anyway, not to blabber on, we'll go ahead and give our closing thoughts on Dalian. So I know I've said it a couple of times at this point. There are really no surprises here. Your opinion of the ship is going to turn generally on how you feel about every other ship like this, whether that's the Atlanta-class premium cruisers, which I would say this is probably closest to Flint, other than Flint's terrible flight times, or the Tech Tree Pan-Asian ships, with the chief difference being that this shoots standard torpedoes rather than deep water torpedoes, and that lack of a reload booster for them. So when it comes right down to it, Dalian is just about the most predictable premium I reviewed in quite a while. That's good news and bad news depending on how you take it. If you like these little ships, then you're going to like this ship. If you don't like these little ships, then you won't. But those are my thoughts. Let me know what yours are down in the comments. And as always, I'll see you on the next one.